Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here today. My countdown clock has not yet started, so I'm going to steal a little bit of extra time as I go. I'm delighted to take the opportunity this morning to shed a light on some of the regional perspectives. I think over the course of the last 2 days we've heard of major issues from climate change to food security, and indeed much of the focus until now and much of the engagement has been from an EU perspective, and I think it's really important to also turn the spotlight over to countries that are dealing with migration management on a scale that dwarfs that of the EU. These are countries of destination, countries of transit, and increasingly, at times, countries of origin as well. We are in very good hands this morning. I'm delighted to introduce you to Neveen El-Husseiny, who is the Deputy Assistant Minister for Migration, Refugees, and Combating Human Trafficking from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Egypt. Then Ms. Beata Geminder, who is the Deputy Director General, DG Migration and Home Affairs, DG Home, the European Commission. And then next to me here, Mr. Amir Saeed, who is the Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Welcome. And last but of course not least, Mr. Savaş, Ünlü, Presidency of Migration Management at the Ministry of Interior in Turkey. So we are going to have a regional tour with some very key countries for the EU, but also in their own respective regions. I'm Jennifer Tangney. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Migration Partnership Facility. Hopefully I will get some great ideas as we go through the session today for some projects and some other initiatives to follow up. The MPF is funded by DG Home and implemented by ICMPD. But maybe we can jump straight into our panel. We're going to take this panel in a few parts. The first will be to ask our state representatives about some of the key challenges that they're facing now. Then we'll come to the European Commission for some information on the EU's response and what the EU is offering in terms of its partnerships. And then we'll come back to our panelists with what I hope will be some very pragmatic and practical proposals for what can happen within these partnerships to address some of the challenges that they have raised. And then we will also come back to you in the audience, hopefully for some time for questions and answers. Neveen, perhaps we can start with you, please. I mean, we've spoken about geopolitics and we've spoken about the geopolitical challenges that the EU faces, and I think it's extremely important that we all take notice of the very fragile and demanding geopolitical context of our partners. I mean, Egypt is hosting somewhere between 6 to 9 million migrants, and among them Sudanese, Libyan, Syrian, and Yemeni populations. We've heard of this global economic downturn, and of course this has an impact on the economy in Egypt. What are the key issues and the challenges that you are facing as a host-responsive country?
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, let me thank the ICMPD for inviting me to take part in this very interesting conference. I would like to take this opportunity actually to shed some light on protracted crises in my region that are often forgotten, and some new crises. Before I discuss with you the challenges that we face as a country of origin, destination, and transit, let me share with you some context and some facts about the situation of migration in Egypt. Well, we're one of the largest countries in the region in terms of population. We have 103 million inhabitants. 35% of them are youth below 30 years. Given the geographical situation, Egypt is actually facing increasing flows of different natures and for different drivers. We have a lot of migrants and refugees who fled conflicts, political instability in countries like Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Libya, and others, and some other countries who have been facing severe challenges related to food and water security, like the Horn of Africa. So actually that was really reflected on the numbers of migrants that we currently host. There was a survey done in July, and it shows that we currently host 9 million migrants. 80% of them come from 4 countries. Sudan, we have around 4 million Sudanese. Syria, 1.5. Yemen, 1 million. Libya, 1 million, plus around 300,000 from South Sudan, 200,000 from Somalia, etc. The average duration that they spent in Egypt is 11 years. 50% of them are women, 40% children, 20% over 60. Those who registered for refugee status is only 3% of them. But obviously, looking at the type of countries and the challenges they face, it's obvious that they really fled a severe crisis, and they would have been eligible to have a refugee status. But given that we provide some flexibility on the residency permits for our neighboring countries, they didn't have to seek for the status of refugees, although they are in a refugee-like situation. It's interesting to know that this number, in 2018, we only had 6 million migrants. So it means that we had an increase of 50% in the last 4 years. We're actually expected to experience bigger flows in the medium to longer term, especially from the Horn of Africa, for all the reasons that we know related to climate change and food security, etc. The government is committed to certain principles. The first one is to ensure the freedom of movement for everyone. We don't have any camps for migrants or refugees. We respect their freedom of movement. Number 2, inclusion in the provision of all basic services on an equal footage with Egyptians. Almost all the migrants and refugees, those speak Arabic, go to government-run schools. They don't pay fees. They are treated exactly as Egyptians. Then for health, it's the same thing. It was obvious that in the outbreak of COVID, they received, although we had really scarcity of the vaccines, but we made sure from minute 1 of availing vaccines that migrants and Egyptians would be treated at the same with the same criteria of priority to receive the vaccine according to the age and health condition. We also try to encourage our partners to apply a one refugee policy approach and not to favor certain nationalities when they try to earmark their assistance to certain nationalities over others. When it comes to challenges, I'll have 3 main challenges. The first one is no country can manage migration alone. Given the political situation in some of our neighboring countries, this security vacuum creates an environment that is conducive actually to the work of criminal networks working on the smuggling of migrants and trafficking. This requires that we really make enormous efforts to combat irregular migration. Since September 2016, no boats or no attempts of irregular migration from the Egyptian shores to Europe were reported. In 2021, around 28,000 attempts of irregular migration were intercepted in our borders. So it's really challenging. Number 2 is the vulnerability. According to the survey that I mentioned earlier, 16% of migrants in Egypt came to Egypt as a country of transit, not as a country of destination, and they are waiting for any opportunity to move forward to Europe, whether regularly or irregularly. So it's obvious that if we're not able, or if they cannot actually manage to find like a decent life and livelihood opportunities, etc., they would really go to secondary movements, and they can be exploited or trafficked, because of course, like the trafficking is the dark side of irregular migration. 15% of the migrants are vulnerable in terms of socioeconomic indicators. So this only requires a lot of effort to address these vulnerabilities. And in that regard, we adopted a national strategy and a plan of action for combating irregular migration and trafficking in persons. And we have like an institutional and legal setup to address these two issues. The third challenge is that most of our refugee and migrant people are coming, as I mentioned, from protracted crises. Well, with the donor fatigue, with the tendency of donors to support short-term projects rather than long-term projects, and the preference to support NGOs, not governments, we would most likely end up with parallel systems that serve migrants and refugees, although the government actually is the key provider of basic services. That would also impact the social inclusion of migrants in the host community. Also, we have a problem with resettlements. Resettlement numbers are very limited. Only 10% of the newly registered refugees, for example, have an opportunity to be resettled abroad. We really hope that this would actually increase, because it is one of the key durable solutions. As I mentioned, that despite the fact that the government actually provides a lot of services, but Egypt is underfunded compared to other countries in the region, perhaps because other countries would focus on registered refugees, but in the case of Egypt, we have to go beyond the legal terminology and look at the fact that there are people who are very well integrated in a system, and we should not actually take it for granted, because we can do our best, but given the economic recession and the increase in food and oil prices, etc., this really puts a lot of pressure on the government and the host community alike. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think there's quite a few points that I hope also Beata can take up in due course. And you know, a 50% increase from 2018 is quite a figure that sticks in my mind. Thank you, Neveen. If I come to you now, Amir, I mean, in March, UNHCR estimated that Pakistan is hosting now 1.3 million Afghan refugees, and already, even at that time, you know, facing some quite significant economic challenges, both in terms of remittances, but also currency issues. The situation obviously has been compounded by the recent devastating floods. And the National Disaster Management Agency has estimated that 33 million people have been affected, and 1 million homes destroyed. So I think we may have to give you a little bit of extra time when we ask you to describe some of the pressing challenges that are facing Pakistan, but particularly in the context of migration. What are the challenges that you are facing at the moment?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. Let me start by thanking the ICMPD for enabling Pakistan to be part of this flagship conference. This very important conference during which we have very candid discussions. That is something we really appreciate. And speaking personally, it's also a great privilege for me to be sharing this platform with this amazing panel, and also the wonderful speakers who have been here on this platform in the course of yesterday, this morning, and later in the day as well. And I was just thinking that the thing about being one of the late speakers in a conference like this is, the good thing is that much more brilliant speakers than you have set the context very effectively for you. But the bad thing is that there is not much left for you to say. So that is my challenge right now. You see, Pakistan is, when it comes to migration, we are a destination country, we are a transit country, and we are also a host country, an origin country. So we have to deal with with all the three dimensions of the phenomenon of migration. And you would also know that we have a substantial diaspora in the Gulf, in North America, and also in Europe, of course, which the remittances from which are basically very vital for Pakistan's economy. They make a very vital contribution to Pakistan's economy. So we do attach a lot of importance to the global discourse on migration. So with this context, now coming to your specific questions about the challenges that we are facing about migration. And when I was thinking about it, yesterday we had this session, and the subtitle of that session was Same but Different. But if I had to describe the challenges that Pakistan is facing right now, I would have to say same and worse. We are dealing with the same issues, the same factors, the same three factors. And when I was thinking about it, the expression that came to my mind was that I would characterize it as a perfect storm. This has already been said this morning by Professor Misha Glenny. So this is where we are. So basically the three factors. The first one is, and many speakers have referred to it, instability and conflict. Then we have the economic downturn that you just referred to. And of course the climate change, the planetary issue of climate change. Pakistan has endured instability and conflict in its region for many decades. As you just mentioned, we have continued to host, we are still hosting millions of Afghan refugees. And this has been the priority of the government of Pakistan to ensure a safe and honorable return of these refugees back to Afghanistan. But I have to say that unfortunately, it appears to me, at least personally, that prospect is receding even further into future with the developments that we have seen recently. And last year, there were reports that the exodus of refugees was up by 40% to Pakistan. And it's not hard to imagine that many of these Afghan refugees would ultimately, they'll make an attempt to maybe move to Europe. So this compounds the difficulties that Pakistan faces with respect to being a host country and also a transit country. And next is the challenge related to the economy. A lot has been said about the conflict and the war in Ukraine and how it's directly affecting Europe. And this morning as well, this was discussed, that the developing countries, the global south, is also being indirectly impacted by this conflict very negatively. Just to quote one figure, I noticed that in some of the recent years, our imports of wheat, which is a staple diet in Pakistan, have been as high as 40% from Ukraine. And so you can easily imagine that what kind of impact would it have for Pakistan in terms of food security. And of course, the inflation and the energy crisis. And then we move to the next issue, which is, and all of this is happening when we were just barely, getting out of the woods with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. There were signs of a recovery, but now we are dealing with this new crisis, which has many dimensions. And then talking about it's been discussed as well, climate change. This is the big planetary, problem. And I think, and it was said yesterday as well, that maybe in the times to come, it would not be conflict which will lead to mass displacements. It's going to be climate change. And we have this crisis staring us in the face in Pakistan. We have this depressingly recurrent pattern of droughts and floods. And the recent floods have been utterly devastating. Almost 1/3 of the country was submerged. I was reading that 33 million people have been impacted by it. Houses have been destroyed. Cattle and livestock has been swept away. Crops have been destroyed. So lots and lots of people, have been pushed down the poverty line. And the sad part is, I have to say this as well, that many of these people who have been impacted by these floods have zero carbon footprint. They have negligible greenhouse gas emissions. But guess what? There is no justice when it comes to Mother Nature. So the perfect storm, all of these factors, we have been dealing with these issues for a very long time, but now there is a negative synergy among all these three factors, and they're feeding off each other, these multiple crises. And the result, unsurprisingly, would be that there will be more desperate people who would want to move, maybe in search for a better future. And this would mean that we'll have to deal with these challenges, migration-related challenges, as a host country, as a transit country, and as an origin country in a much more complicated way. And well, here we are. I hope I've tried to set the context for the problem that we have on our hands right now. And I think in the second round, we can also talk a bit about what can we do individually and collectively to deal with this problem.
Absolutely. I think, the same but worse is perhaps a good description. And yes, I'd like to follow up with you as well, maybe in your solutions, is just to understand, is this worsening humanitarian context and the economic context? Is it creating a public scenario where the hosting of refugees is less politically popular? Is it closing the space for the welcoming of refugees?
Yes, Jennifer, I think I would have to agree because, again, I keep referring to the previous speakers because they have been so comprehensive in all the themes that they touched upon, that publics, and they tend to be selfish, and especially in times of difficulty, kindness is in short supply, and people's patience and their willingness to be generous and kind towards others who are strangers, of course, that is negatively impacted. Of course, this will be a challenge. And like I said, that for a very long time, Pakistan has very generously hosted this huge refugee population, one of the biggest in the world, if I'm not wrong. But it remains the priority of the government of Pakistan that there is stability and peace in Afghanistan, and all these refugees can go back to their homeland with honor, with dignity, and safely.
Thank you. Mr. Ünlü, I'm sure that you will have had some resonance with some of the challenges described by our other panelists. I'm going to quote to you a statistic from your own ministry, that at the moment there are 3.7 million Syrians under temporary protection in Turkey. Turkey, excuse me. There's also a sizable number from other countries, including Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. I think it's fair to see that the hosting of migrants has become a central issue in the Turkish political discussions, but also looking at the countries of origin along your route. The flows don't look likely to end anytime soon. So my question to you is, how will migration issues unfold in the coming year, and what are the key challenges that Turkey is facing?
Thank you very much both for the question, but of course, first of all, for organizing this excellent conference, and also for the invitation and giving the opportunity to express our views, our country's perspective in this platform. As to if I come to your question, of course, it's quite difficult to precisely say about the future and to predict how things will evolve in the upcoming period. Because as many speakers before me expressed, many other developments have a direct impact on the migratory flows and the trajectory of migration. And it's another fact that we are living in difficult times. We are experiencing many difficulties in many parts of the world. As other colleagues expressed, energy crisis, food crisis, climate change, internal strifes, civil wars, even conventional wars. All these trigger human mobility, having a direct impact on migration. Yet, it doesn't mean that migration management is just a reactive one. We can still develop and implement proactive migration management policies, both inside our country and also jointly through regional and global perspectives. What I can tell you about how we see the future, the upcoming year. But before that, and the challenges we are facing, the challenges ahead of us, but before touching upon these issues, I would like to share with you once again some of the statistics you have already shared. But what is the current situation in Turkey? And what was the past, the last decade, what we have done? Because in order to better appreciate the challenges Turkey is facing, to better understand our perspective, we need to briefly recall the past and what we have done so far, what we have experienced so far. As you have also stated, slightly lower than 3.7, but above 3.6 million Syrians are living in Turkey under temporary protection status. And it's more than 1 decade now. And also 320,000 third nationals, Afghanis, Iranians, Iraqis, Pakistanis, and some other third nationals under either as international protection status holder, or applicants. And since the early stages of Syrian civil war, I mean, since we opened our door to Syrians, we have not just provided shelter to Syrians, but we have also ensured their access to employment, free access to health facilities, health, education. And when I said we let them access to employment, I would like to also highlight some differences between Turkey and European Union, because many colleagues also stated similar things vis-à-vis the situation of Ukrainians in EU. Compared to EU countries, we have a relatively young population. So we can't talk about a shortage in labor market. So we opened access to Syrians to job market, to labor market, when there is already harsh competition in that. And also I would like to remind you that almost 800,000 Syrian babies were born in Turkish hospitals. More than 700,000 Syrian pupils are being currently educated in Turkish schools alongside with their Turkish peers and free of charge. And all this goes also for Afghanis, for Iraqis, for Syrians. And so we have been doing this, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, now more than 1 decade. So our activities, our engagement, our proactive migration policy management is not just limited with our borders. So we have been also, since the first Turkish military operation into northern Syria in 2016, with following 2 operations, we have managed to clear an area more than 8,000 kilometers inside Syria, where currently 2 million Syrians are living in coherence and peacefully. We also provided all the basic public services in this area. Today it's possible to find that an ordinary human being seeks for a decent life there in the northern Syria. Hospitals, schools, all parkings, all other amenities. It's possible to find everything for a decent life. So plus, we're also doing our best for the people inside Idlib. In Idlib currently 4 million people live in the Idlib, the escalation zone I'm talking about. The population of Idlib before the civil war was less than 1.5 million. And more than 2.5 million of the people currently living in Idlib are IDPs. And they also largely rely on humanitarian assistance from other countries. And Turkey is also the main, because we are neighbor direct, we have a direct land border with the Idlib province. So we are also doing our best to assist the life, to facilitate their life there. So far, we have launched a project of 100,000 barricade houses for Idlib, inhabitants of the Idlib. And we have managed to complete more than 6,500 of them and allocated them to the people of Idlib. And the other part of the project is ongoing. The construction is still ongoing. The same things go for other parts of the source countries, such as Afghanistan. For example, after Taliban took the power in Kabul, Turkish embassy, for example, has never shut down. Turkish ambassador has never left Kabul and never stopped the operations in Kabul. The same goes for Turkish Red Crescent, for Turkish Cooperation and Development Agency, TİKA, AFAD, and all other Turkish NGOs. Since the very beginning of the change of power in Afghanistan, we continued to show every effort to facilitate, to alleviate the problems inside Afghanistan. That's because of we share historical ties, it's because of culture, etc. But also we also believe that a good migration management starts at the source country and also ends in the source country.
And so in terms of the challenges that you're facing,
yes,
if we can...
The challenges, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, we should understand the story. I mean, if you want me to come to the challenges we are facing briefly, the situation in Afghanistan continues to pose a big challenge for all of us. Despite all of our efforts, the situation is quite fragile and, sensitive. And the irregular migratory flows, as you said, continues to pose a big challenge for all of us. The number of irregular migrants we apprehended in Turkey since the beginning of New Year doubled compared to the same period of the last year. Actually, many colleagues, a few colleagues from EU countries mentioned about the increase in the Western Balkanian routes. Unfortunately, some of our colleagues from neighboring countries, I mean, I can say the name as well, particularly Greek colleagues, blaming Turkey for instrumentalizing the issue of migration. But that's not correct. We are doing our best. As I said, we apprehended double amount of irregular migrants compared to the same period of the same year. There is always, I would like to say something to all audiences, there is always a correlation, a direct correlation between the inflow and outflow. If there is an increase in the inflow into your country, definitely there will be an increase in the figures outflowing to your country. The same goes for EU, actually. When you look at the figures, our colleagues generally talk about the figures in Western Balkanian routes, but when we look at the figures in the English Channel, when we look at the figures outflowing the EU towards the UK, there is also the same increase. That's a small figure which is not shared, unfortunately, by some colleagues. So if it is possible to prevent the illegal crossing totally, the EU, with a much higher capacity, 27 nations, Frontex, EU, and all other law enforcement office units in France can prevent it. But it doesn't, things doesn't go in this way. So that I would like to state this issue. So irregular migratory flows will be a challenge. But another challenge is, after 1 decade, and despite all Turkey's efforts, the unwillingness of some countries in the global north for burden sharing, and the understanding of burden sharing, limiting the notion of burden sharing to only financial support, and the unwillingness to increase the quotas for resettlement, and the instrumentalization of the issue, as you described, the increasing public debate in the country, resulted in a low tolerance in Turkish society. That will also have an impact on the mobility in the upcoming days. Therefore, you also stated Turkey's project ensuring the voluntary return of 1 million Syrians to the northern Syria, to the safe areas supported by Turkey. If we can't ensure this voluntary return, there will be a human mobility towards the West. This is what we are understanding when we look at the current picture. So all these pose challenges. And also, for example, the situation in Lebanon. There is a significant increase in the numbers of people fleeing Lebanon for Europe, and the danger in Mediterranean. And it seems that the numbers of people, migrants, that will get drowned in Mediterranean may unfortunately increase if we don't address the situation in Lebanon. It's not directly, maybe you may think it may not directly impact Turkey, but it will impact on all of us. It will influence all of us, unless we address it adequately in a timely manner. So I can say a few other things about the solutions, what we can do, how we should tackle the issue, but I think you will ask in the upcoming.
We will come back to
session.
your solutions. Thank you very much. Beata, I mean, as a global partner in development and international cooperation, I mean, based on these challenges that you've heard, what is the EU's response and what is the approach?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thanks for all of your interventions. I think, you know, as a point of departure, what has been also said in this conference very valuably is that since the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, also in Europe, situation has changed a lot. And I think our point of departure is different than before the 24th of February. And I think that's very important also taking into account this global debate, because the instability and the conflict that you have been feeling in your countries earlier has also arrived to a large extent in Central European countries and in the EU now. And obviously we have also been hosting now over 4 million Ukrainian refugees over the last 6 months, which has posed a lot of stress on our system. So fully share all your also concern about that with these very high numbers that we have done, of course, because we wanted to also welcome, and we will continue to do so, but it is something which also leads to more stressed societies than we used to have. So on that background, in terms of response to these global challenges, it's of course clear that we're trying to continue to implement the policies that we always had in support of all the regions that you were representing, and to continue to support worldwide. And one of the key instruments we have chosen for that is the Global Gateway Strategy, which is the EU's strategy enshrined in the Social Development Goals until 2030 to support worldwide secure links in digital, energy and transport sectors, to also strengthen health and education and research systems across the world. And here ACP countries also play a big role. The Global Gateway is basically representing the Team Europe approach, which means that we're trying to bring together the means that the EU has as such, and where the means of the EU are distributed and programmed by us, but that we join up all the efforts of our member states, so that we basically 27 triple the output. I don't think there's a word for that. And this Team Europe approach is very much there to make an impact in all of your regions and countries, and that we can help you in your challenges. So Team Europe, meaning the EU institutions and the member states, we will mobilize up to 300 billion in the next programming period for this Global Gateway initiative, which goes beyond now only migration-related issue. But migration is always tackling people. It's tackling a whole society approach, and therefore, you know, I think it's very important to underline that. We have, of course, had to make a lot of adjustment on our initial programming for the next until the 27 financing period, particularly due to the very the recent events. And we have worked a lot to support all our partners for more stabilization in food security. I think it's very clear that this is a key challenge for everyone in the regions. We have 4 strands: a solidarity strand to step up emergency aid and make macroeconomic support. This goes up to 150 million for ACP countries and 100 million to the IMF's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust Fund. We have a second strand, which is a production and resilience strand to increase food availability and accessibility where it's needed. So we have recommitted from the European Development Fund 350 million for ACP countries, and have together in the Team Europe approach, we will make up to 2.7 billion available for ACP countries until 2024 on production and support of food availability. Then, of course, we have worked very hard with Ukraine to enable the export of grains. You all know about that. And we're very grateful also for Turkey having played an instrumental role in getting the shipments out of Ukraine, and had also other solidarity lanes opened. And we obviously work as a fourth strand also with international partners to support further the Global Alliance for Food Security and so on. It's an issue which we really devote, and we diverted a lot of our funds, and hopefully we will help there, and we will bring in total until 2024 nearly 7.7 billion to the affected regions within the Global Gateway and the food security strategy. Then, of course, initially, when we were thinking of how can we support in the next programming and funding period, which lasts until 2027, partner countries and regions, we were focusing on climate change. And you all know it is a further driver that we are losing a bit sight of now because of the recent events and the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. But, of course, it will be with us. So nearly 30% is our target to support investments on addressing climate change and its consequences, and support people and regions affected by natural disasters and environmental degradation. And Pakistan is a very good example. We have taken over as EU the presidency of the Platform for Disaster Displacement recently for the next 18 months. And we will continue to push responses to climate change within this 18 months presidency as much as we can. And then, of course, we have worked hard over the past years, and we will develop more on migration partnerships with all regions and countries. We do understand that it's a difficult situation in many countries, and you have described it very well. We do want to work in a partnership approach, and we know that we need to address root causes of displacement and why people leave their country, because no one is voluntarily leaving their country. It is always because you need to find a response to problems you have at home. We are fully in line with the social development target there to facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. I think it's important to underline that we want, migration is there and has always been in the world, will always stay, and it's something that, we, as my commissioner always says, we would like to deal with like a routine event. That's absolutely something that we would like to see happening. But in this partnership approach, of course, it's no size fits all. So every region, every country has different needs and has a different analysis of the problem, and then also different solutions, if there are any. But in general, we ensure assistance and protection for refugees and host countries through strengthening asylum capacities. We support migration management, including fighting against migrant smuggling, reinforcing border management, and also, of course, cooperation on return and readmission, but also enhancing on legal pathways. And we perhaps come to this in the next round. Wherever I go now, I hear we need more labor. So there is definitely an opportunity. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So indeed, we said that we were going to come back to our panelists to ask if they have any pragmatic solutions or ideas for partnership approaches, because we talk a lot about partnership, but partnership needs operationalization. It needs to deliver. So Neveen, may I come back to you? Do you have some specific solutions or some specific initiatives that you would see that could be beneficial between the EU and Egypt?
Yes, Jennifer, since I shared with you 3 challenges, I also have 3 proposals or responses. First of all, partnerships, and I really second what you just mentioned, that about the importance of partnerships. Migration partnerships are not about return and border management, and should tackle root causes, should allow for more better mobility, capacity building to combat smuggling of migrants and trafficking, better coordination to protect vulnerable people. We're currently actually in a discussion with the EU to formulate some activities to implement together in the coming 5 years. I'm glad to learn about this global gateway strategy. I think there are a lot of ideas and initiatives inside the EU, but that we can work on, provided that we can overcome the bureaucracy and the complexity that sometimes partner countries face when they deal with the EU. The second idea is we actually, since I'm a country that hosts people from a protracted crisis, I think we need to put more emphasis on the nexus of humanitarian development, peace nexus. That was mentioned several times yesterday, for example, by Commissioner Amina and several other speakers, Libya, Lebanon. We really need to tackle root causes, ensure a sustainable peace. Short-term projects is not enough. We need to look at the development and medium and to long-term projects. The third idea is better burden sharing. Developing countries host 84% of refugees in the world. We need to actually implement this burden sharing better. We have the GCR, but no one speaks about it that much. Unfortunately, we tend to see that there is a tendency for asylum evasion and burden shifting policies rather than burden shifting policies rather than burden sharing. And really developing countries bear the majority of responsibility when it comes to protecting refugees. The coming periods are very difficult. As the IMF mentioned yesterday, the worst is yet to come. So I think we need to be prepared, and we think we need to look for the longer-term cooperation with the countries hosting a large number of migrants and refugees. Since we have been talking about the recession, economic crisis everywhere, and shrinking public budgets, I think we need to optimize the limited resources that we have through better coordination with host countries to avoid the duplication, to avoid projects that are not sustainable. We really need to optimize this limited resources, because without continuing to support host countries, then the vulnerability of migrants and refugees would increase, and definitely there would be secondary movements, and we can see more disasters in the Mediterranean or other places. Having this in mind, Egypt launched an initiative called the Joint Platform for Migration and Refugees. This is a new mechanism to improve coordination between donor countries, the governments, UN agencies, and civil society. We managed to focus on, as a first stage, to focus on two sectors, education and health. We would like to improve the quality of services provided to migrants and refugees in these two sectors, and also increase the resilience of host community. We held like a meeting with the donors to discuss the ideas. The funds will not go directly to the government, but it will go to the UN agencies. We still see some reluctance from our partners and saying that, well, but we're too busy with Ukraine. Okay, but also there is a situation that have been here for over a decade. What can be done to address this? We really hope that we would see better involvement in this initiative, because it allows better aligning of objectives and better coordination. And at the end, we cannot do it unless we do it together, as it was mentioned yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Amir, over to you with exactly the same question. I mean, what are some of the practical steps that you would like to see in your partnership?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Well, I would start by saying that we all agree that migration and irregular migration, it's a multi-dimensional problem. So our individual and collective efforts will also have to attack these problems along a multi-pronged approach. I'll first start by sharing what Pakistan is doing nationally, in particular to curb illegal and irregular migration. And I will first mention, of course, the Pakistan-European Union readmission agreement, which Pakistan has with the EU, whereby we take back all the Pakistani nationals which have reached the European Union illegally, which don't have the legal reason to stay there, as well as any third country nationals which may have transited from Pakistan and ended up in the EU countries. And Pakistan remains fully committed to effective implementation of this very important agreement. And it was also mentioned yesterday that Pakistan is also engaging bilaterally. We have very good cooperation with many other countries along the irregular migration route. And our law enforcement agencies, in particular the Federal Investigation Agency, is closely collaborating with its counterparts along this irregular migration route to break up illegal trafficking rings and to curb this menace. And of course, we are also closely engaged with many international partners, with the UNODC, of course, the ICMPD, with which we concluded an agreement. Of course, Pakistan's engagement with the ICMPD goes back many years, but it was put on more formal footing in 2020 when we signed this bilateral agreement, which has, among many other objectives, it has the objective of raising awareness about the risks involved in irregular migration and how to curb irregular migration, trafficking in persons, and smuggling of migrants, etc. And of course, finding legal pathways of migration as well. And we are also engaged with the IOM, and we are also taking steps both in the legislative sphere and in the enforcement sphere. I would like to share with you that only in 2018, Pakistan enacted these two very important pieces of legislation, the Smuggling of Migrants Act and the other one was Trafficking in Persons Act. So these two very important legislations were enacted in 2018, and the government also mounts very comprehensive nationwide campaigns regularly to raise awareness about the risks that people expose themselves to when they become victims of these trafficking rings, and so that they can make these informed decisions about migrating. And then we have set up a research and analysis center at the Federal Investigation Agency, which has the task of studying the latest trends in irregular migration and also the new routes which are being adopted by human smugglers. And now, moving on to zooming out and looking at the big picture, I think if I had to use two adjectives to describe a good, sound migration policy, it would have to be that it should be, one, it should be comprehensive and it should be balanced. When we say comprehensive, I think the Deputy Director General has already hit all the right chords, that it has to address the root causes. For example, coming back to climate change, our policies to tackle migration have to, subsume our efforts, for example, in helping developing countries develop resilience against climate change and better adapt to the effects of climate change in a number of ways. And of course, then there is the issue of economic disparity, and you have mentioned quite a few initiatives, including, of course, the Global Gateway Initiative, which will help developing countries, create economic activity, generate job opportunities for their youthful population so that they have less incentive to move. And they, like you said, migration is never anybody's first option. People are often driven to it by desperation, by lack of opportunity. This is not a decision that people make lightly. They are, in most cases than not, they are actually driven to it. So, and of course, conflict. It has been Pakistan's consistent position all along that we have to find negotiated, peaceful settlement of disputes, and we have to end these conflicts as soon as possible. There can be no disagreement with that. And coming to the specific solutions that you mentioned, that you actually would like to hear from me, and I was just trying to think, I think one thing that readily comes to my mind is that Councillor Andrew Rose mentioned yesterday that there is this demand for nurses, you know, in the developed world with the new demographic realities. It was said yesterday that more adult nappies are being sold in Japan than nappies for babies. So this is a reality, and there is no running away from it. And I think that if managed properly, migration can be a win-win. People have always moved. Migration is a reality. It will always be there. People will keep, moving to build a better future. And the challenge is to manage it well. So maybe one, I think, concrete idea that I would take away with me, and probably I would recommend to my government, would be that maybe we should work on training nurses, which we could possibly, send as labor to the developed world. And I think one initiative possibly could be, and now I'm just thinking off the top of my head, that we have some very good nursing schools in Pakistan. Probably they could enter into arrangements with their counterparts here in Europe and elsewhere for recognition of their degrees and diplomas, etc. This is one thing we could do. And another thing, since we are here in Vienna, sitting in Austria, I would like to share with you that a couple of years ago, there is this brilliant initiative whereby there is a consortium of Austrian universities which have come together to build this Pakistan-Austria Institute for Engineering and Applied Sciences in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And initiatives like this can build this pool of skilled labor, which can be better suited to the labor market demands in Europe and elsewhere. So these are the two things that just come to my mind. And finally, just another thought that I would just like to say out loud, that this is the Vienna Migration Conference. It's not the Vienna Irregular Migration Conference. So we have to keep that in mind, that we have to focus on legal pathways. So the other objective that I mentioned earlier was balanced. I have this feeling, and there is this feeling in the developed world as well, that there is probably more focus on law enforcement, on border management, on walls and fences, and the interception of ships taking migrants across the Mediterranean. There is a very heavily securitized approach to migration, which has to be balanced with finding legal pathways for migrants, and also initiatives. I know that the EU is doing a lot on this count, but we need to do more for better integration and assimilation of migrant communities in the EU. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I'm pretty sure that Beata will be following up on your proposal around the nurses. Mr. Ünlü, the same question to you. So be very interested to hear if you have some specific ideas for how your experience and that of the EU can come together for partnership.
Thank you very much. Of course, after this very interesting, very illuminating speeches, it is inevitable to fall into a little bit repetition. So I will do my best to be concise and to say new things, but it seems that it will be a little bit difficult because it's not possible to reinvent America, to already explore the America. There are some facts about migration management, and some of them have already been stated by my colleagues. First of all, I wish there was a kind of toolbox for practical partnership, and we should just open and take some of them and use so quickly. But I'm afraid there isn't such a thing. So partnership is crucial for a successful global migration governance, and developing and implementing this partnership is key, yet it takes time. Yeah. And addressing the root causes, as colleagues expressed, is also key. Yet it takes time. I mean, Global Gateway Project, UN Sustainable Development Goals, all these are correct steps in the correct direction. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not possible to change the situation from the night to the day. Of course, it doesn't mean that we should give up them. Of course, we should focus on them. We should continue to address the root causes. We should increase our efforts jointly so as to address the root causes in the source countries. Because, as I said, the migration management starts at the source countries. And now the second issue, of course, every country, every sovereign country has a right to define its border, to protect its border. We're also doing it. And so combating with smuggler networks is also key for a successful migration management. I mean, not just structural factors, but also meso-level factors, networks, smuggling networks, organized crimes, all these, highly intertwined with each other. And struggling with all these aspects is important in the migration management. And development of the partnership, not just in the civilian part of migration management, but in the policing part is also important. I totally agree with them. Yet, when we look at the long-term permanent solutions, the one is about the integration of migration to the host countries. The second one is ensuring the voluntary return of migrants to their origin countries. When we look at the integration, that's a problematic issue because much of the origin countries, source countries in the global south, in the underdeveloped part of the world. And unfortunately, the partnership is generally planned devised so as to ensure that the migrants, the asylum seekers, will continue to stay in the neighboring countries to these underdeveloped countries, which are themselves either or underdeveloped or developing countries. And the burden on these neighboring countries is huge. The pressure is increasing day by day. So burden sharing, therefore I said in the first part of my speech, is much beyond providing financial support to neighboring countries of conflict zone to make sure that they will continue to accommodate the refugees or asylum seekers or migrants for a long time without complaining. We can't continue in this way. So until all these global gateway projects, UN Sustainable Development Goal, until we make sure that every corner of the world will be a safe and secure place, a place that people will be able to live freely, survive a decent life, we should also rethink the burden sharing, how a real burden sharing should be. So we should first increase the quotas. The Western governments, the global north should increase the quotas and increase the numbers of resettles. So currently, unfortunately, the resettlement quotas is unbelievably low. I share with you that we have in Turkey 320,000 international protection status holder or applicants. Unfortunately, the only 10%, even less than 10% of the application I received each year in Turkey, I'm able to resettle to third countries. In fact, Turkey is part to refugee convention with a geographical restriction. We only grant conditional status to asylum seekers, with a condition that these people will be resettled to other countries party to the convention. But in practice, it doesn't work. In practice, it works as we don't have any reservation, any restriction to the convention. Therefore, we should rethink, reshape our understanding about burden sharing. The second issue I would like to touch upon, return. So particularly, I would like to bring the discussion to the case of Syrians in Turkey. As I said, we significantly invested in northern Syria. We supported the area for the development of enabling a decent life there. And so far, more than 500,000, to be exact, 500,027 Syrians voluntarily returned to their own homeland, to their country. I would like to highlight, I would like to put it forward very clearly that non-refoulement principle is valid for Syrians. So we have never forced, we are not forcing anyone to leave Turkey for Syria. So non-refoulement is a basic principle that's still being implemented for the Syrians in Turkey. Yet we are trying to create suitable environment where people will be willing to return to their own country, to their own land. Because as I said, there are safe areas, and it's possible to find the necessities of a human being in these areas. So one of the biggest challenge and biggest partnership for us in the upcoming period is about how we can ensure the voluntary return of these people to this area. And I'm afraid the support we receive from our partners in EU and in other countries in the global north is not sufficient in this regard. And there a correlation between the political solution to the conflict in Syria and the voluntary return of Syrians wants to be established. But we say that there is a safe area and it will be totally based on voluntariness. We won't force anyone. Non-refoulement will continue to be the basic principle that we will be implemented in the process. We will be implementing in the process. Therefore, any practical partnership should address this issue as well. Because, as I said at the beginning of my speeches, a low tolerance is developing. This may have potential to impact on the human mobility in Turkey, and this is not a threat, or this is not, the instrumentalization, the issue. This is just sharing the realities in the field with our colleagues here. So, of course, I don't deny the fact that financial support is also important. So, Global North should continue to support the Global South and other neighboring countries with financial projects. However, what I'm trying to say is that, for example, resettlement, increasing quotas and resettlement cannot be a replacement. That's the bottom line issue. So all of these aspects should be, carried out simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we've had quite, I think, quite a diverse list of potential initiatives and solutions, but I mean, looking at, well, certainly partnership remains very much on the agenda. I do take that smuggling, trafficking, and organized crime remain a very strong thread where increased cooperation along the routes, but also with the EU is necessary. Very pleased to hear that legal pathways remain on the agenda. The Migration Partnership Facility is implementing initiatives in this area. So it's good to see that there is still an interest here. And then also, burden sharing, burden shifting. So it would be, I think, timely, Beata, to hand back over to you for, the resources and the kind of tools that you have at your disposal.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a lot was already said of what we can do and what we can do together. So that's also very, very inspiring to listen to that. The bigger picture is, of course, we should have no more conflicts in the world. And the second big picture is we shouldn't have climate change in the world. So, it would help us a lot. But we can dream, and here we are in a room with a lot of people who are managing migration and have a very realistic approach. What can we do better there? And I do think that, what was already said on the regular pathways is very important. Because you're right, the rhetoric in Europe has been very politicized towards a lot of very negative rhetoric. The numbers of irregular migration compared to who comes legally in the European Union is very unequal. We're talking about nearly 2 million legal migration pathways, be it employment, be it marriage, be it studies, which is also an important one, towards around 200,000 approximately, I'm now generalizing the numbers a bit, of irregular efforts. But of course, it's also that these generate a lot of attention. And they generate attention because while, we have a management cycle of people arriving, it breaks down at the return end. And that's, I think, something which doesn't help to manage this in a neutral, very orderly and normal fashion, which we all should do in every country, in every region. So it's important that that circular works. but therefore it's also very important that people are not enticed to pay their last savings to organized crime, but rather go on a legal pathway to improve their lives and that of their children. And for that, we have put in place, the member states have put in place quite a lot of legal pathways, because it's not a large EU competence. You know that the EU shares or implements what the member states has given to the EU as competence. And I think there's a lot of bilateral efforts by our member states, but there's obviously also efforts at our level. We have recently, and part of the partnership approach that we have, that legal migration always plays a role when we discuss with you on anything. We support en route courses in the country, what we do also in terms of readmission agreements, it's all always interlinked. And we are now trying to build up something which we call talent partnerships, which is the basic bottom idea is we get people like your nurses, good example, to come to work in the EU, also train them in the EU, but there is a requirement, you have to go back. Because it's also very difficult for the countries that lose talents and brains into the European Union or any other country and do not benefit their society to build their society and in their country of origin. So this is a small project at the moment where ICMPD, I think Jennifer can say a lot more about it. We're trying to build it up with Morocco, Tunisia and Egypt for a start, but would then of course want to enlarge it to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Senegal and Nigeria, and then of course other countries if the idea prospers and turns out to work. It's one of the ideas of legal migration. There's no magic bullet to that. I'm personally always a big fan, why don't we have a European green card? I think the green card is just an iconic recognition worldwide for the US. We have a blue card, but it's only for skilled workers. So the green card has a larger focus. So perhaps I can give a few of the member states here some ideas who are in the audience. Then, of course, you have talked a lot about resettlement, and I know there's a demand on doing more resettlements. I have explained, we are trying to keep the commitments we have made. And you know that we have the largest number from Turkey, even if, from your perspective, I understand it's a small number. But at the same time, at the moment, in EU, we have, as I said, as much pressure as you can feel in your countries on our reception systems and on the possibility of the society to deal also with new arrivals and with a lot of accumulating problems. But we as EU, we really want to keep these resettlement goals. We're going to have a new resettlement forum. We're going, hopefully, that member states continue to pledge for that. But it's a slow process, that's for sure. As much as relocation between member states is a very slow process. So magic bullet is certainly not that. Therefore, you know, what you mentioned is very important as well, is the organized crime that is organizing the smuggling of migrants. It's a lot of money involved there. And it's money that is badly spent and should be rather spent on helping people largely in every country to fight poverty than giving it to a few crime groups. And there the EU is trying to organize with partner countries partnerships on fighting traffickers and fighting organized crime. And that's for us very important that we have that with as many countries as possible, because I think if the traffickers realize together the third country and the EU are behind trying to detect them, it has a huge impact and will help. So ultimately, but going back, no size fits all. We need to work in partnership. We need to develop for every country, region, the best tool box possible, but we are definitely willing to continue this work with all every region around the world in a very constructive and comprehensive spirit.
Great, thank you so much. I am conscious of time, but I'm also conscious that it's very important to give the audience their opportunity. And I see we have one hand raised here, we have another here, and one more over here. If I can ask you to please introduce yourself and to stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Ulan. I represent Kyrgyzstan. I'm a deputy head at the Council for Migration under the Speaker of the Kyrgyz Republic Parliament, and I'm a rapporteur on human trafficking. So the panel session is about EU partnership, perspective, and priorities and challenges as well. And Madam Chair, you just mentioned that you have a very diverse list, and let me make it more diverse. We have a case of Pakistan, and Mr. Savaş mentioned about Afghanistan. And I just want to remind that there is another region next to these countries. I represent Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. When we talk about Central Asia, we need to talk about Fergana Valley and Afghanistan. If anything happens in this region, it will definitely reflect and impact the whole continent. It will definitely reflect and impact the West. Whatever happens in East reflects the West. And I just want to say thank you to previous speaker, Misha. He mentioned Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan conflict. We have the first signal. We had a 4 days military conflict, full-scale military conflict since the 30 years of independence of Central Asian countries. The full scale, tanks, aviation, grenade launchers, MLRS, Grad, Bayraktars, both countries used whatever they have. It is scary, it is dangerous. Only 4 days, 140,000 citizens of Kyrgyzstan displaced. 10th of killed and more than 200 are wounded. Our president, just after a few days, mentioned everything, underlined everything in his speech at the General Assembly in New York. So you can read the speech. And when we talk about the partnership, EU partnership and priorities and the challenges, I just want to remind that there is a Central Asia, Fergana Valley, and Afghanistan. And the EU, what is the role of EU in this case? EU can be a mediator. EU can mediate the process. Be objective partner in this process as well. Okay. So thanks. It wasn't a question, it was just a short comment. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We had, yes, here please at the front. So please do stand. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanne Celestine. I am now a US citizen, but before that I was a Rwandan genocide survivor. And I pretty much, many of you know of Rwandan genocide against the Tutsis. Within like basically 100 days, over 1 million people died just because they were from a different ethnic group. And the world obviously turned a blind eye on Rwanda, but I really much appreciate what Neveen said. We have this energy of supporting people from Ukraine. I am in the United States. I oversee academic, and the support we have given to our students, even in the United States, is just massive. So I would love to see that applies to other regions when we have crises. For example, we had refugees coming from Venezuela. They did not receive the same kind of support, kind of love. And so as a immigrant myself, and also somebody who has experienced human trafficking, I spoke about human trafficking yesterday, and something that I experienced in Rwanda after the genocide, after losing my parents and losing many families from my family. I was trafficked into the Congo and was about to be sold into marriage as a 10-year-old. And here on this stage, and I get emotional about this, I don't really much hear the plan that is put in place to protect people who are being trafficked. I would love to hear those policies put in place, because when we talk about smugglers, that's different from human trafficking. I mean, they all get eventually exploited, but I wanted to see what kind of plan do you have in place, what kind of policies you have planned to support and help those people. Many of the people who go into refugees, like Neveen said, nobody chooses to just leave their homes and just boom, you have one outfit, and then here you go. You somehow end up in this, situation. So I really would love to hear what kind of money you're allocating to these people who are being traumatized, who have PTSD. We know that many countries, rape is used as a weapon, so we know that. We're seeing it coming from Ukraine as well. So what are the plan that you have for those individuals? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one last question before we come back to close this round. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassador James Kur from the Republic of South Sudan, but current chair of the Khartoum process. First of all, as I may not have chance later on to take the mic again, I want to thank the organizers, topped by the ICMPD, for this wonderful organization and reception. First of all, I want to make one thing clear. I have no problem with the fact that charity begins at home. And this is to say Europe has right to first look into its own territory before looking beyond. I have some appeals to make, given this background. I very much believe that there is a need to provide fish hooks and fish nets instead of ready fish meals. I'm appealing to the partners to re-strategize and gradually shift the humanitarian aid into sustainable development programs. I'm saying this because Africa has what it takes it has what it takes. I mean, it has enormous and endowed with natural resources. It has what it takes to transit and exit from poverty and be self-reliant. Poverty, of course, is one of the main root causes of migration. And again, finally, I want to say, because now is egg from chicken, is chicken from egg, others may say, first peace, then development. But I say, development can bring about peace, because somebody who has nothing to lose has nothing to worry about. But somebody with something, somebody who owns something, has something to fear and protect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think very wise words. We are essentially at the end of our session, but yet I would still like to maybe offer a response on the trafficking question specifically, and then we will close the session. Before you answer, just to say, so that I don't have to come back, we will still have our 30-minute coffee break, and we will still have flash sessions in the room next door. So there will be 2 more flash presentations by ICMPD colleagues. Yeah. Please, Vieta.
No, but I think thank you very much for bringing up these various views. I think very, very beneficial to hear that. And of course, protection continues to be the core at the asylum policy of the European Union, and I think of all the countries around the world as well. And having also seen and talked to people affected too, it's very important to keep this up. And one of the core issues there is that protection is also protection capacities are built up not only in some countries, but everywhere. So one of the things we try to do as European Commission, and we finance very actively projects to build up protection capacities in countries that are neighboring to conflict countries. Or, you know, I have been personally very involved in a project, regional development program in North Africa to build up asylum capacities in Algeria, Morocco. I think Egypt was covered by it too and was involved as well. So that people are sensitized to it, that they recognize the vulnerability and they act accordingly. And this is, of course, also a core job of the UNHCR and outreach. So definitely something one should not lose sight of, and definitely also something that we have to build a network for the people suffering from it worldwide.
Great, thank you very much. I think with this we will draw this session to a close. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my panelists. Thank you very much for your contributions. I certainly have a few takeaways that I would like to follow up, and some member states can expect me to come and see if they may be interested in some new partnership approaches. So I thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.